Hello fellow travellers and welcome to episode number 10 of The Apple and the Hero. My name is Sara Orfali and today I would like to be your guide on the pathways of history. In the last two episodes, I have started to introduce the concept of Switzerland needing heroes and legends to glue it together. This is far from being a Swiss peculiarity though. If that had been the case, I wouldn't have had a podcast to share with you. As we've seen until now, and as we will see in future episodes, all nations stand on top of their legendary heroes and myths. What makes Switzerland so intriguing on this score is that the myths, which today are widely considered foundation myths for the country, are stories which have been taken out of obscurity and greatly embellished on purpose, with a clear goal in mind to give the Swiss people something they could all feel as theirs, regardless of their cultural traditions, canton, language or religion. As I introduced Steviko to you, I told you that his story had specifically been moved to Switzerland because in the second half of the 19th century, the newly created Federal Council had needed heroes. When we talked about the Oath of the Rütli, I mentioned that the document had been taken out of oblivion to become the guiding light of the new Swiss Confederation. What is peculiar is not just the fact that they made such actions in the first place, but that they weren't the first to realize that Switzerland as a country might have needed something like this. That the Confederation might have needed some glue to keep all of its pieces together. The honour of being the first to figure this out and to use, or better yet directly create, foundation myths for his country goes to Egidius Tschudi, 16th century historian and chronicler from the canton of Glarus. In this case, both terms are used loosely, because if he thought himself as one, history itself has proved that he was more of a creative storyteller than a thorough researcher of historical truths. The four main Swiss foundation myths, of which William Tell and the Oath of the Rütli we've already met, and the rest we're going to get to know in this episode, all come from the 2 volumes of his Chronicon Helveticum. The 2 thick books are certainly proof that what he lacked in training, he made up for in enthusiasm and verbosity, but his contemporaries might have been less than supportive about his endeavours, at least in written form. He would not live to see his opus magnus printed as he would have wanted. That honour would be given to him only 2 centuries later, and in no more than a handful of copies. But the stories he told caught on like wildfires. They became such a central part of the Swiss law that they were a part of history for centuries, and it's only recently historians have started to challenge them. I'm not saying that each word he wrote in his chronicles is false, far from it. There is truth in the Chronicon Helveticum. It's just that sometimes it has been embellished and enriched to the point of distortion. Take the story of William Tell, for example. What is a brief rendition of North European legends with a Germanic twist became stories so fine in the hands of Egidius Tschudi that Friedrich Schiller had very little to do when he decided to publish his work in the 19th century. The stories that Tschudi created have been woven together from different sources, supplied by the chronicler's near-infinite imagination when details proved to be scarce. Before we go and see for ourselves what else has come out from his inked quill, other than the William Tell we know and love today, there is a question that begs an answer. Why did Tschudi embark in such a task? If he did it for the glory, then I'm sorry for him, for there was no glory to be had, neither in life nor in death, as he was destined to the dark oblivion of forgetfulness. Another one of his works, the only one to be printed during his lifetime, in this case a geographical book of the Swiss Confederation, brought him the much-desired fame. but the history of Switzerland would prove to be a much more difficult opponent. He never finished the books, which might explain why they were never published during his lifetime, but still he persevered, and his efforts had granted him the title of Father of the Confederation, if only in the 18th century. Had it been for this recognition that Tschudi had slaved away on the books for half his life? Not quite. I doubt that being considered a Father of the Confederation had been what he had in mind. His reasons had been quite selfless. He had done it for love. No, these books were never meant to be given to a lover as a potential courting gift. That's not what I meant. What Tschudi had loved was the still wobbly Swiss Confederation. If anything, these books were meant as a present for Switzerland itself. Why though? Because in the 16th century, Tschüdi's beloved country was one hair away from crumbling completely under the strain of external pressure. Even nowadays, the cantons live as separate entities, each preferring to do things on their own way. But while today such freedom is allowed inside the protective borders of Switzerland, the solitary cantons struggled not to succumb to the external forces during the Middle Ages. Strength lies in unity, it is said, and the cantons of the Switzerland of old knew this better than most. These proud, free communities ill-suffered being bound together and sought, at least at the beginning, to free themselves from the constraints. Yes, nobody had forced Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden to join forces, nor Zurich, Zug, Bern or Glarus to follow suit in such an alliance. They had done all of that by themselves, realizing that yes, independence was really a nice thing, but somebody guarding your back also had his own perks. And yet, while clearly aware of the pros of such an alliance, the individual cantons have always been loath to give up their freedom for the community's benefit. Had they succeeded in splitting themselves apart in the 16th century, we wouldn't have Switzerland today, but rather a slightly bigger Italy, Germany and France. It had been Tschüdi's labour of love which tied them together, giving all the people a sense of belonging despite their different politics, economics, religions or languages. The stories that Tschudi collected all over Switzerland, and sometimes supplemented with his own imagination, have acted as the glue binding the cantons together. William Tell we've already met. The three grisly confederates standing together on a field we've seen last episode. Now, it's time I introduce you to the other legendary heroes who, while less known than the bowman from Uri, although way better known than poor Divico, have had quite the role in shaping the Switzerland we know today. Let me introduce to you the heroes of Morgarten and the heroic deeds and death of Arnold von Winkelried. I have two things to say before we jump into the world of medieval warfare. One is that I'm introducing them together because these heroes represent the start of that military prowess that would see Swiss soldiers in most of Europe's armies as the very best mercenaries on the market from the 15th century. 2. All these characters are nothing but legends. Despite the veracity of some events, both of them are good examples of Tschüdi's elaborate flights of fancy when history didn't give him what he needed. In order to fully understand the events happening in this episode, we need to go slightly back on the path we're travelling. In the last episode, I introduced the Holy Roman Empire, the Habsburg family, and its role, both in central Switzerland and in the imperial history, and the circumstances which had led the people of Uri first, then the people of Schwyz later, to petition the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II for their freedom. We talked about the representatives of the foreign cantons of Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden finding the need for an alliance against the potential retaliation coming from the scorned Habsburg family, whose territory had been curtailed by the will of the emperor. Whether the document on which the pact is recorded is true or not, it doesn't change the fact that an alliance happened. When is slightly less clear. Do you remember at the end of the last episode when I tossed around one last possible date for this alliance, 1307? I didn't explain it then, because it wouldn't have made much sense without introducing to you one last character. Yes, you're right. 1307 is the date that Aegidius Tschudi wrote in his chronicle as the foundation date for the Confederation. From where did he take it? Only he knows. The rest of the story is absolutely identical to what I already told you. 3 people, 1 cow pasture, and hands in the air with thumbs and 2 fingers extended. Until the 1291 Pact was brought to light, 1307 was the date the Swiss used as the start of their own confederation. So, which is it? 1291, 1307, or, as I told you last episode, 1315, when the Peace of Brunnen was signed? Well, none of them. Most probably, according to the latest research, the alliance started in 1309. For reasons yet unclear. Why have I introduced the subject once again? Because in this episode, we're going to talk about the Peace of Brunnen. If you're asking yourselves where that came from, give me 1 second. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Swiss history is a concept very much far away from a linear point of view. Things might have happened in chronological order, but with a sizable serving of legends in the midst, it's very easy to lose the plot. For your clarity and mine, don't worry, you're not the only ones who are at risk of being lost. Let me recap. In 1231, Uri asked Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II for freedom, which was granted, and the territory was taken out from under Habsburg's control and put directly under imperial control. In 1240, Schwyz asked and obtained the same thing. In 1273, Rudolf I of Habsburg finally crowned the family's ambition by being elected as the new Holy Roman Emperor. In a still unconfirmed year between the end of the 13th century and the beginning of the 14th, Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden decided to enter an alliance to protect themselves from the retaliations of the Habsburgs, despite the fact that in the past 6 decades, the Habsburg couldn't have cared any less about getting back the territories of central Switzerland. According to Tschudi, which is all I need to tell you for you to know that this is a legend, the Habsburgs decided it was high time to get back their territories in central Switzerland on a dreary, humid and rainy day in November 1315. As I've said before, Tschudi never invented a story from nothing. There's always some kind of source behind what he writes. There's no guarantee that the source is in any way reliable, but there's always at least one. In this case, there's 2. We have 2 chronicles describing the collision between the Habsburgs, determined to finally get back what had been taken away from them, and the small but brave army of newly minted confederates, hell-bent in defending their land from the invaders. Such a clash has been known to history and legend as the Battle of Morgarten. What happened then? It was raining that 15th of November 1315, as the peasants of Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden waited for news about an attack. For days, rumours had swirled around, sightings of a mighty armada descending from the north into central Switzerland. 8,000 men and horses marching under the banner of the Habsburg. Where were they going? The rumours didn't seem to point to a particular destination. Maybe the city of Einsiedeln, in modern Canton Schwyz, whose cluster had called for an arbitrage by the Habsburgs between the monks and the people of the city of Schwyz. At first, it had seemed as if Leopold I, Duke of Habsburg and commander of the army, had wanted to cut through Arth, which would have been the better choice, as it was the only route big enough to accommodate for such a big army. The army of the three cantons had reached just about the same conclusion and had been waiting for them in Arth. And yet, at the very last minute, it seemed as if the Duke had changed his mind. Rather than go for the easiest route, he decided to cut through the countryside, passing through Morgarten. This was a big risk for the Habsburg and their army. The territory was squeezed between a mountain and a lake, and the soil was basically all marshes. Neither chronicle gives us a reason for this change of heart. Maybe Leopold I had wanted to take the Confederates by surprise, appearing where they would have least expected him, even if it was a poor tactical decision, simply because the cavalry could not express its potential with the horses stuck in the mud. Maybe the strategy would have worked in the end if one noble family in his army hadn't betrayed him. The noble family from Hunenberg shot some arrows towards the Swiss encampment, not with the intention to kill them, but to warn them. On the fletchlings of the arrows, they had written a message: "Beware of Morgarten." And so, warned of the change of strategy, the Swiss army moved to Morgarten and took up the one position on the battlefield which would have guaranteed their victory. As I said, that territory is squeezed between a mountain and a lake. With so many men and horses, the Habsburgs were forced to stay at the foot of the valley, which left the Swiss free to take the peak. What happened next was less of a battle and more of an ambush. Safely ensconced on the slopes, the Swiss simply pelted the Habsburg army with rocks and logs. Without solid terrain under their feet, remember they were in a marsh, the Habsburg soldiers had nowhere to run. Those who tried to flee towards the lake were shot down by the Swiss archers. The chronicles describe it as a massacre, with the Habsburg soldiers voluntarily choosing to drown themselves rather than face their enemies. It was a shameful defeat for the Habsburgs, with Duke Leopold I barely saving his life by the skin of his teeth, or so the chronicles say. On the other hand, it was a glorious victory for the Confederates, the first since the start of their alliance, whether in 1291 or in 1309. Now that they had the confirmation that their alliance worked, and worked well, Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden drafted another pact, the famous Peace of Brunnen, dated 9th of December 1315. According to the historians, this document is a new version of the 1309 pact, of which we have no copy, in which the three cantons decided to pursue not just a military alliance, but also a common foreign policy. The absence of copies from the supposed document of 1309 is the reason why the Peace of Brunnen became the founding document of the Swiss Confederation. Well, that's great, right? Yes, if only this was true. Don't take me wrong, the document does exist, and you can see it in the Museum of Federal Charters in Schwyz, right next to the 1291 Pact. It's the battle we cannot find. With the exception of those two chronicles, whose veracity is still being debated, no other mention of the Battle of Morgarten is made in any other book or chronicle, whether Swiss or Habsburg, until Egidius Tschudi. But by now you should remember to take what he says with a pinch of salt. Worse still is the fact that in spite of the many archaeological digs, no traces of the battle have been found. It seems as if it has been completely lost, or even worse, it has never happened in the first place. Archaeologists have dug extensively, both on the mountain, in the marsh, and in the lake. They had to, since finding the remains of the battles was the only way to stop the rivalry between the cantons of Schwyz and Zug on where the battle had taken place exactly. For your geographical information, Morgarten is quite literally on the border line between the two cantons. For now, is the canton of Zug, the victor of this particular battle, not because the archaeologists have found any traces of the battle in Zug's territory, but because when it was time to build a monument, the canton of Zug was the fastest one between the two of them to build one in its territory. Still, despite the many archaeological digs, nothing came up, except one lonely dagger and one Schwyz banner, which is nowhere near enough to confirm that a battle had taken place there. Do you remember the thousands of dead squished by rocks in the mud, or the Habsburg soldiers choosing death in the lake? Well, we haven't found those, and believe me when I tell you that the Egerri Lake is not that deep. So what happened? We don't know. And since we don't know, and the written sources we have are not quite so reliable, modern historians have been forced to declare the Battle of Morgarten nothing but a legend. Did this stop the Swiss from believing in it? Absolutely not. The heroes of Morgarten have become figures worthy of national respect, whose deeds, as General Guisan put it at the beginning of World War II, were to be imitated by all Swiss people. So, if the Battle of Morgarten never existed, does this mean that the Habsburg never tried to militarily get back the territories which the Emperor had taken away from them? Well, no. Although it took them quite a long time before attacking the Swiss in battle. For decades, it had seemed that the alliance the three forest cantons had stipulated with each other, in order to protect themselves against the Habsburg, had been nothing but unjustified paranoia. Even so, since the terms of such a pact were quite favourable, other cantons had decided to join in. In the central decades of the 14th century, 5 other cantons had decided to join Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden. With Zurich, Zug, Luzern, Bern and Glarus, this new confederation had gone from private pact between small communities to something which had the potential of growing and influencing foreign politics. Since the territories of Uri and Schwyz had been poor, the Habsburgs had not done much to get them back. Unterwalden, as well as Zurich, Zug, Bern and Glarus, had never been under their control, so whether or not those territories decided to ally themselves together, it wasn't a Habsburg problem. And yet, not even when Luzern became a part of this new alliance in 1332 did the Habsburg move against the Confederates. On the contrary, Luzern was both part of this new confederation and Habsburg territory at the same time. What happened then? It was pretty much clear that the Habsburgs had no intention of wasting military power in central Switzerland. For them, the situation could continue as it was. The territories under them, like Luzern, were free to ally themselves with whoever they wanted, as long as they paid the proper tribute to the Habsburg. As of the rest, they really weren't a Habsburg problem. It was the city of Luzern which decided that enough was enough. On July the 9th, 1386, they called on their allies, the other cantons, to join the fray with them against the Habsburgs in what they called the Battle for Freedom, but it is known to the history books today as the Battle of Sempach. Just to be clear, this battle did happen. We have chronicles, a lot of them, and all of them verified, and we have archaeological remains in the plains of Sempach, outside of Luzern. This is the first battle between the Confederates, now a confederation of 8 cantons, and the Habsburg. It is in this battle that the Swiss debuted a weapon which would be later known for its brutality and would become the mark of the Swiss mercenaries in the 15th and 16th century, the Swiss halberd. For those of you who've never seen a halberd in real life, just imagine it as the unholy child of a pike, a lance and an axe, all of them mounted on a pole which ranged from 3 to 5 meters in length. It was thanks to this weapon, a skillful usage of strategy and resources, and the baking heat of July day, which meant that the poor Habsburgs' knights were slowly roasting to death in their metal armors, that the Swiss scored their first victory against the Habsburg. This one really happened, and in this case, Duke Leopold III of Habsburg lost his life in the battle, clinching the Swiss victory. As much as the Battle of Sempach, with its victory, its strategy, and its brand new weapons, has reached a legendary status, in this episode, I'm not looking for truth. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I would like to concentrate on the heroic and very much legendary deeds of one soldier in particular. He was quite the man, towering over his comrades with a height of 1.90 m. He fought for the Confederate Army, marching under the banner of Nidwalden. His name was Arnold von Winkelried. As I said, the Battle of Sempach ended with a Swiss victory thanks to strategy, weapons, and Mother Nature. According to the legend, though, victory was brought to the Swiss camp by Arnold von Winkelried's heroic sacrifice. As he realized that the Confederates were getting overwhelmed by the bigger and better organized Habsburg army, von Winkelried decided to make the ultimate sacrifice to guarantee victory for his motherland. The story goes that he recommended his land and his family to his brothers in arms, and then, with nothing more than a halberd in his hands, he threw himself at his opponents. Maybe the Habsburg soldiers were less prepared than what the Swiss thought. Maybe it was the sheer madness of seeing a basically unarmed man barreling towards them, probably yelling. Whatever it was, von Winkelried's actions sowed confusion in the ranks. The Habsburg soldiers broke formation, and the Swiss army penetrated in those cracks, managing to snatch a glorious victory from the jaws of defeat. Great story, right? Such a man whose action brought glory and success to the Swiss is worthy of being remembered, right? There should be statues of him, ballads about his deeds, the lot. And yet, there's nothing. A couple of paintings, mostly from, can you believe it, the 19th century, and little else. There is not one single mention of his heroic death in any of the chronicles contemporary to the Battle of Sempach. So, where did all the information I just gave you come from? Remember Egidius Chudi? Yep, that's the one. Maybe he thought that the truth behind the victory at Sempach wasn't, heroic enough. Whatever he really did think, we don't know. What we do know is that he plucked Arnold von Winkelried from another battle, the Battle of Bicocca in 1522, and plonked him right in the middle of the Battle of Sempach. I can confirm this for you. The historians have found no Arnold von Winkelried alive in the 14th century, but one Arnold von Winkelried, commander of a division of Swiss mercenaries in the Battle of Bicocca. If he died heroically in that battle, I cannot tell you. Maybe Chudi gave him a better reputation this way. And so, here we are, with yet another hero who turned out to be nothing but a legend. The crossbow of William Tell, the courage of Morgarten, the self-sacrificing spirit of von Winkelried, and even the great big oath of alliance between the three fathers of Switzerland turn out to be nothing but stories written by the same man as his love declaration and last-ditch effort to save his beloved home country. Even Divico, whose existence is confirmed, has been used as a pawn in the fight to keep Switzerland from disintegrating in the face of internal pressure. Is it nothing true, then? Is Swiss history a great big joke, a fairy tale and nothing more? Of course not. Maybe they didn't find an army, but the people of Uri did have the courage to speak up and fight for their freedom, going insofar as to petition the Holy Roman Emperor directly. Maybe their death weren't so tragic and heroic, but many Confederate soldiers did lose their lives in the Battle of Sempach, fighting for their freedom. Maybe we don't remember their names, but their sacrifices did win them what they wanted. And maybe There was never a Swiss who stood in front of a hat and refused to bow at it, but there have been many others who stood in front of injustices and decided to do the right thing. This might only be my opinion, but as I see it, it doesn't really matter if the past of a nation is made up of real-life events or legends. What is really important is the lesson they teach us. William Tell, the heroes of Morgarten, Arnold von Winkelried, the 3 representatives who signed the first alliance. All of them might not have really existed, might not have done the things they're famous for today, but their stories have inspired others, real-life people whose names have been lost in time. And those people have changed history. Those people have made a difference. Who knows what would have happened if those stories had never been told? So, in a way, it is true that Switzerland and its inhabitants are the children of these heroes, and they have inherited their courage, their wit, their irreverence, their self-sacrificing spirit, and their deep love for their home country from them. We have come to the end of this deep dive. I hope that our travels on the paths of Switzerland have given you a better understanding of the country. Maybe next time you come here, you look at the beautiful mountains and crystalline lakes with new eyes, for it's not just in its nature that Switzerland beauty resides, but also in its history. I will wait for you here in 2 weeks, when we'll travel south this time for a little bit of warm weather. We'll follow the life and the heroic deeds of the prince of a small state, who started a journey from Europe all the way to the depth of the Asian continent. As always, all the research and the writing for this episode has been done by me, Sara Orfali, Doctor in History. Subscribe to get the new episodes and join the community at www.theappleandthehero.com for insights and bonus stories. Goodbye for now. Safe travels.